Mara arrived at the campus auditorium long before anyone else, even though she wasn't scheduled to rehearse for another hour. She liked having time to breathe, to settle her nerves, and to get familiar with the room before it filled with noise and strangers. The place was larger than she had expected, with rows of chairs stretching back into darkness, and faint echoes that made every small sound feel important. She walked down the aisle slowly, her hands tucked into her sleeves, and paused when she reached the stage. The piano sat near the center, its polished black surface catching the soft overhead lights. Mara stepped closer, feeling her heartbeat quicken. No matter how many times she played, stepping up to a piano in a new room always made her feel like she was meeting an old friend all over again. She brushed her fingers lightly across the cool edge of the instrument, letting herself smile for the first time that morning. She didn't come from a family that understood music. Her parents cared for her, but they didn't know much about instruments or concerts, or how much practice it took to play even the simplest piece well. They worked long hours, and the house was often filled with the sounds of rushing, cleaning, cooking, or resting. Because of that, Mara had learned to keep her passion quiet literally and emotionally. She practiced on a cheap keyboard most nights with headphones on, playing softly until she memorized the movements by feel rather than sound. The real piano at the community center had become her sanctuary for years, the one place she could play without limits. Now she stood on a college stage, feeling like that same quiet girl, but also a little braver than before. She chose this school because it had a small music program and even smaller expectations. Nobody here knew her history. Nobody knew she had spent most of her life being overlooked. To them, she was just another freshman, a face among thousands. And she liked it that way. At least she thought she did. She sat on the piano bench and adjusted the height slightly. She wasn't going to play yet. She just needed to feel the bench beneath her and the stage around her. She placed her hands on her lap and looked out toward the empty seats. In a few hours, they would be filled with students rehearsing for the campus talent show. Mara wasn't sure why she had signed up. She wasn't used to crowds, and she didn't like attention. But something inside her told her it was time to stop playing only for empty rooms. She stayed there for several minutes before she heard voices echoing from the hallway. The performers were starting to arrive, chatting, laughing, calling out to each other. Mara quickly stood, stepping away from the piano as if she had been caught doing something wrong. She backed toward the side of the stage, hoping to blend in before anyone noticed her. But the moment the group walked in, the atmosphere shifted. Students rushed toward the stage carrying props, costumes, and instruments. A few greeted her politely, though most were focused on their own routines. Mara stayed quiet, nodding back, keeping to her corner. Then the door swung open again, and a small group of loud, confident voices entered together. At the center of them was Dylan, the tall student, with a swagger that suggested he was used to being the funniest, the boldest, and the most admired in every room. He carried a guitar case slung casually over his shoulder, and walked with the kind of comfort Mara wished she had. He noticed her almost immediately. "Hey, you're new, right?" he said, raising his eyebrows slightly. Mara nodded. "Just here to rehearse." "For the talent show?" he asked, sounding more entertained than curious. "Yeah." Dylan grinned at his friends before turning back to her. "What are you doing? Singing? Dancing? Magic tricks?" "Piano," she answered softly. He let out a short laugh, not cruel but careless, as if the idea itself amused him. "Piano? That's cute. We've got some real performers this year. Hope you're ready to keep up." Mara felt her stomach tighten, though she forced a small nod. She didn't know what to say. She wasn't good at responding quickly or defending herself, especially in front of people like him. People who spoke so loudly, the room seemed to bend around them. Dylan's friends chuckled quietly, sharing glances. It wasn't anything dramatic, just a soft mockery that drifted through the air. Mara tried to look away, hoping it would pass. "You're playing that?" Dylan said, pointing at the grand piano behind her. "Yes." He raised a hand in playful surrender. All right. Maybe you're great. But you look like someone who practices nursery songs at home. No offense." She felt the heat rise in her cheeks, despite her efforts to stay calm. I just like playing," she said. His friends laughed again, but Dylan shrugged, acting as if his words were harmless. "Hey, confidence is key. Don't let me distract you. I'm sure you'll do fine." The conversation ended there, but the echo of it stayed with her. Mara looked down at her hands, wishing she could tuck them out of sight completely. She wasn't used to being dismissed so openly, especially by someone she had just met. More students took their places around the stage as the coordinator called everyone to attention. Mara walked toward the back, trying to stay invisible, but she couldn't shake the sting of Dylan's laughter. It followed her like a shadow. The coordinator began explaining the order of rehearsals and giving instructions. Mara listened carefully, though her mind felt foggy. She kept glancing toward the piano, wanting to sit and play just to remind herself why she was here. But before she could, Dylan's voice echoed across the room again. He was joking with another performer about how at least the music acts won't put anyone to sleep this year. His eyes flicked toward Mara for a brief moment, and though he didn't say her name, she knew who he meant. Her throat tightened. She didn't want to cry, not in front of strangers, and definitely not because of someone like him. She took a slow breath and looked away, focusing on the stage floor instead. When the coordinator called her group for warm-ups, Mara stepped forward. Her hands trembled slightly, but she kept moving. She wouldn't give anyone another reason to doubt her. The piano bench waited for her. She sat down again, feeling an odd mix of fear and determination. She had practiced for years in silence, shaping her skill in the shadows. She wasn't the best player in the world, not even close, but she knew she wasn't what Dylan assumed got. As the room settled into a low buzz of chatter, Mara let her fingers hover above the keys. Her heartbeat thumped in her ears. She wasn't supposed to start playing yet, but she pressed one note lightly, letting the sound drift across the room. It wasn't much, just a single tone, soft and warm, but it grounded her. It reminded her of who she was and what she could do. She didn't know it yet, but soon that same quiet confidence would grow into something bigger, something no one in that room expected. For now, though, she simply sat still, waiting for her turn, unaware that the moment she played for real would change everything. Mara stayed seated at the piano long after the coordinator finished giving instructions. She kept her hands resting lightly on her lap, trying to calm the small waves of tension moving through her chest. The room was filling quickly now, more performers arriving one after another, chatting loudly, tuning instruments, and going over their acts. She wished she could disappear into the bench, or even into the piano itself, anything to avoid being the center of attention. She wasn't used to crowds, and she certainly wasn't used to people watching her every move. Her world had always been small, quiet, and predictable. But here, everything was loud and unpredictable, especially the feeling inside her that kept telling her she needed to prove something not to everyone else, but to herself. Across the room, Dylan stood with his guitar case open on the floor, checking his strings while laughing with two of his friends. They seemed perfectly comfortable, as if they belonged on a stage, as if the entire room was made just for them. Mara didn't envy their confidence, but she did wonder what it felt like to move so easily in spaces like this. She turned her gaze back to the keys. The piano looked calm, untouched, waiting. It reminded her that she didn't need loudness or confidence. She only needed sound, the kind that came from deep inside her, the kind that felt like truth. A few students approached the stage to begin warming up. The coordinator called for the first group to rehearse. Mara wasn't in the first group, which gave her time to observe. Some sang, some danced, some recited lines for their performances. The atmosphere was buzzing with energy, and Mara could feel the excitement even from across the room. But beneath the excitement, she also sensed judgment little glances, small whispers, comparing performances, predicting who would impress the crowd and who would fade into the background. She already knew which group people expected her to fall into. After the first group finished, the coordinator nodded at the next set of performers. Mara felt her breath hitch, not yet her turn, but close. Her palms felt warmer, her heart beating a little faster. She brushed her fingers gently against her jeans, hoping to calm the nerves shaking through her. Eventually, it was her group's turn. She walked up slowly, almost too carefully, feeling dozens of eyes trail behind her. The stage felt bigger now, emptier, even though people stood all around. The lights weren't bright, but she still felt exposed. She took her place on the bench again. Before she could settle her hands on the keys, a voice called casually from the side. "Don't get nervous," Dylan said with a smirk. "Just pretend it's a kid's lesson. You'll be fine." A few people laughed quietly, and Mara felt the embarrassment rise inside her like a tide. She didn't look at him. She didn't want to. She only focused on the piano, the one thing in the room that didn't judge her. The coordinator clapped lightly. "All right, let's give each performer a small warm-up. Just a few moments to get familiar with the space." Mara nodded, though she wasn't sure anyone noticed. She took a deep breath and lifted her hands toward the keys. Her fingers trembled at first, but the moment she touched the smooth surface of the piano, something inside her steadied. She pressed a single note. It rang out clear and warm, filling the room with gentle sound. She expected it to disappear quickly, but it hung in the air longer than she thought. The room wasn't completely silent, but a few heads turned, surprised by the tone. She didn't look up. She stayed focused, pressing another note, then another. She didn't play anything complicated, just simple sounds, letting the piano speak softly. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She just needed to remember the instrument, the feeling, the connection. But as she continued, she could feel the room shifting in small ways. Some of the quiet conversations stopped. A few eyes lingered on her longer than before. The sound she created wasn't loud or showy, but it carried emotion steady, calm, and unexpectedly strong. One student leaned toward another and whispered, "She plays nicely." Mara heard it, even though it wasn't meant for her. She finished her small warm-up and gently lifted her hands away from the keys. Her heartbeat felt steadier now, her nerves settling in a way she didn't expect. The piano always did that for her. It always turned noise into calm. But when she glanced to the side, she caught Dylan staring at her, not impressed, not thoughtful, just curious, almost confused. Maybe he wasn't expecting even simple notes to sound so clean. He tilted his head slightly, as if trying to figure something out. She looked away quickly, not wanting to read too much into it. As the next performer stepped forward, Mara stood from the bench and moved to the back of the stage to wait with the others. Her heart still thumped, but the panic had eased. She could breathe again. She didn't realize that her quiet warm-up had caught the attention of more than a handful of people. When the coordinator dismissed her group, Mara stepped down from the stage, relieved to finally have a moment to herself. She walked toward the far end of the room where the chairs were mostly empty. She sat in one of them and folded her hands together tightly. She wanted to disappear, not from shame this time, but from the sudden attention she felt growing around her. She wasn't used to being noticed, not even positively, and she wasn't sure how to handle it. But while she sat there, taking in slow breaths, she heard footsteps approaching. She looked up to see a girl with short brown hair and soft eyes standing next to her. "Hey," the girl said with a gentle smile. "You play beautifully." Mara blinked, surprised. "Oh, I just did a small warm-up." "Still," the girl replied, shrugging lightly, "you've got a nice touch. Most people just slam the keys when they're nervous. You didn't." That was really calming to listen to. Mara didn't know how to respond. Compliments always made her uncomfortable, not because she didn't appreciate them, but because she didn't know where to put them, what to say, where to look, how to act. "Thank you," she whispered finally. The girl gave her a supportive nod before heading back toward her friends. Mara sat quietly, absorbing the small moment. It felt strange in a good way. She had expected nothing but judgment today, maybe even laughter. But here she was, receiving kindness instead. She let out a slow breath. Maybe today wouldn't be as bad as she feared. But the peace didn't last long. Dylan lingered near the edge of the stage, arms crossed, staring in her direction. His expression wasn't teasing now. It wasn't mocking. It was something else, something she couldn't read. His friend nudged him. "What are you looking at?" "Nothing," Dylan said quickly, turning away. But the stiffness in his voice told Mara it wasn't nothing. He'd noticed her. Really noticed Dot, and for reasons she couldn't understand yet. That realization made her stomach twist with nerves all over again. As the rehearsals continued, Mara tried to focus on others' performances, but she kept replaying the warm-up in her mind. The notes she played, the way the room seemed to shift, the stir of surprise in a few faces. She wasn't trying to impress anyone, but what if she could? The idea frightened her. The idea excited her too. Maybe she had spent too much time hiding her talent, too much time convincing herself she wasn't ready. Maybe she had let fear shape her more than she realized. And now, sitting there with the soft memory of the piano still lingering in her fingers, she wondered if it was time to stop shrinking. She didn't have to be bold. She didn't have to be loud. She just had to play. Her moment would come soon, when she sat at the piano again. Not for warm-up, but for her real turn. She didn't know it yet. But the next time her fingers touched the keys, everything in the room would change far more than it had that morning. For now, she simply waited, unaware of the quiet storm building around her. One note at a time, Mara waited quietly near the corner of the auditorium as more performers finished their rehearsal rounds. Her mind wasn't on the singers or the dancers or the comedians who took the stage. Instead, her thoughts replayed the tiny moment from earlier, the warm-up, the single note she had played, and the way people had paused, even if just for a second. She hadn't meant for anyone to notice her. She wasn't ready for attention. But something had been different about that moment, something she couldn't explain. The sound she created had carried more emotion than she intended, almost as if the piano itself was trying to speak for her. The audition room hummed with energy, but Mara felt like she was standing in her own world, a world that felt just a little bigger now. The coordinator soon called everyone together again, explaining that the second round of rehearsals would be more structured. Each act would get a chance to run through a portion of their performance. Mara swallowed hard when she heard her name on the list. She wasn't ready. Or maybe she was, she couldn't tell. As the first few performers took their turns, Mara tried to calm herself. She breathed slowly, counting each inhale and exhale. Her hands still trembled slightly, but she rubbed them together to push away the nervousness. The piano was just a few feet away now, quiet, patient, waiting. She tried to draw strength from that. Dylan stood near the front of the auditorium with his guitar, joking loudly with his two friends. They laughed at nearly everything he said, even when the jokes weren't funny. He seemed to love the attention, and the room seemed to love giving it to him. Mara wondered if he had ever felt nervous before a performance. He didn't look like the type, but she reminded herself that people were not always what they seemed. But the moment he glanced in her direction, she felt her chest tighten again. His eyes were sharp, curious, almost serious, very different from the mocking look he'd given her earlier. She quickly looked away, pretending to study the floor dot when the coordinator finally called her name. Mara's heart skipped. She felt a chill run through her. She stood slowly, every step toward the stage feeling heavier than the last. She didn't look at anyone as she walked. Not at the crowd, not at the performers, and especially not at Dylan. She focused only on the piano. When she reached the bench, she paused for a moment. She could feel dozens of eyes on her, waiting, judging, expecting very little. She lowered herself onto the bench and breathed in deeply. She placed her hands gently on the keys, but didn't press anything yet. Her fingers hovered above the surface, trembling faintly. The room felt still, almost too quiet. The coordinator nodded at her. "Whenever you're ready. Just give us a sample." Mara nodded back. She closed her eyes. She didn't try to silence her nerves. She didn't try to pretend she wasn't scared. Instead, she let the fear sit beside her. She had learned long ago that pushing fear away only made it stronger. But accepting it, letting it stand with her, made it easier to breathe. She pressed one low note. That single sound rolled through the auditorium like a soft wave. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but it had a weight to it, a depth that made the room pause without meaning to. A couple of students in the back lifted their heads. One whispered. Mara didn't hear the whispers clearly, but she felt the shift in the room. It was subtle, like the temperature dropping just slightly, like a breeze passing through. She opened her eyes. She pressed another note higher this time. Then another. Simple, steady, controlled. The softness drew people in. The clarity of each sound made even the quietest breaths seem loud out then. Without overthinking, Mara began to play. Not the full piece she had prepared. Not the big performance she had rehearsed for weeks. Instead, she followed the feeling inside her, letting her fingers glide across the keys in slow, fluid motions. A mix of gentle chords and delicate melodies. Something calm. Something honest. She didn't try to impress anyone. She wasn't trying to prove Dylan wrong or show off her talent. She simply wanted to express something she had carried for years, something she had never spoken out loud. And the room felt every bit of it. The soft notes floated around the space, curling into the corners, touching the walls, settling into the silence between breaths. Even those who weren't paying attention before now turned their heads. The coordinator stood still. A dancer who had been stretching near the front slowly lowered her arms. A boy who had been scrolling through his phone put it away. People listened. Really listened. Mara continued playing, her fingers moving with a kind of quiet confidence that surprised even her. She had never played like this in front of others. Not with this openness. Not with this level of vulnerability. But it felt right. Her hands moved faster now, the melody growing richer. It wasn't flashy, but it had emotion, real emotion. Not something rehearsed, not something forced. It came from somewhere deep, somewhere she rarely let anyone see. And then, as quickly as it rose, the melody softened again. Fading like a gentle sigh. She ended on a single soft note. The sound lingered, hanging in the air longer than she expected. Then everything fell silent. Mara lifted her hands from the keys. She sat back slowly, feeling her chest rise and fall with unsteady breaths. The room remained quiet for a few seconds, so quiet that Mara wondered if she had done something wrong, or if the silence meant they hadn't understood her playing at all. But then she heard a single clap. Followed by another . And more . And more. The applause grew into a warm, steady sound that filled the entire room. It wasn't wild. It wasn't loud. But it was meaningful. Honest. Mara blinked, trying to process it. She had never received applause like this. Not in school, not at home, not anywhere. She looked toward the back of the room without thinking. Dylan stood there, his arms uncrossed, his expression completely changed. No teasing, no smirk, no amusement. Just surprise. Real, undeniable surprise. He didn't clap right away. Instead, he just stared at her, as if trying to understand how the quiet girl he laughed at earlier had just played something that felt so alive. Finally, after a long moment, he brought his hands together, slowly at first. Then with more intention. Mara looked away quickly, her face warm with embarrassment. She didn't know how to react. She didn't know how to handle attention, especially from people who had doubted her. The coordinator stepped forward. "Thank you, Mara," he said, sounding genuinely moved. "That was beautiful." Mara nodded shyly and stood from the bench. Her legs felt weak, but she made her way off the stage as calmly as she could. When she reached the side of the room, the girl who had complimented her earlier smiled again. "I told you," she whispered. "You're really good." Mara felt a small smile tug at her lips, though she didn't trust her voice enough to respond. She sat back in her chair, her hands still trembling from adrenaline. She let out a long breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The applause faded, replaced by whispers and murmurs all about her. She didn't hear every word, but she caught pieces. "Did you hear that? She's amazing. Where did she learn to play like that? I didn't expect that at all." Each comment felt unreal, like she was dreaming. She wasn't used to being talked about, not in good ways. She didn't know what to do with the praise. She sat quietly, unsure whether to hide or smile or pretend none of it was happening. But one thing was clear. The room had changed. The way people saw her had changed, and she had changed too. Even if only a little. That one moment of courage, one note. One small risk had opened a door she didn't even know she was allowed to walk through. As she sat there, heart still racing, she realized something important. She was no longer invisible. People had seen her. People had heard her. And the moment she stepped away from that piano, she understood something she had never quite believed before. She belonged. Here, maybe not in the loudest way, maybe not in the boldest way, but in her own way. A way that didn't need permission. A way that didn't need approval. All she needed was the sound of those notes and the courage to let them be heard. And whether she wanted it or not, she had just taken the first step into a story she never imagined herself living. Mara sat in her chair long after her rehearsal ended, trying to understand everything that had just happened. The sound of applause still echoed faintly in her memory, warm and unexpected. She felt strange, almost weightless, as if her feet were no longer fully touching the ground. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel small. She didn't feel like someone others looked past. She felt seen. The room buzzed with conversation. Not loud or chaotic, but steady students whispering about the acts they had just witnessed, laughing at inside jokes, going through their lines and dance steps. But Mara could feel something different in the air, something she wasn't used to. People kept glancing at her, not with confusion or doubt, but with curiosity and respect. A few even smiled at her. Tiny smiles, quiet smiles, but smiles all the same. She wasn't sure how to react. She folded her hands in her lap, squeezing them gently, as if she needed to make sure she was still real. Across the room, Dylan stood with his guitar resting against one leg. He looked distracted. His usual grin was gone, replaced with a thoughtful expression that didn't fit his usual personality. One of his friends nudged him, whispering something that made him let out a short laugh. But it didn't reach his eyes. Mara tried not to look, but she could feel his gaze flicking her way, every few seconds. Like he couldn't help himself. Her stomach twisted at the thought. She didn't want to think about him. Not after the way he acted earlier. But she couldn't deny that something had shifted. He wasn't laughing now. He wasn't teasing. He was watching. The coordinator called for a short break before the next set of performers. Students scattered around the auditorium, some stretching, some practicing lines, others heading for water. Mara stayed in her seat, unsure where to go or what to do. Eventually, she stood and walked toward the hallway outside the auditorium. She needed a moment alone, somewhere quieter, somewhere she could let her emotions settle. The hallway was dim and cool, a sharp contrast to the warm buzz inside the auditorium. She leaned against the wall and took a deep breath. She could still feel the piano keys beneath her fingertips. She could still hear the soft melody she played, the one she hadn't planned, but somehow came out exactly the way she needed. She closed her eyes. For a moment, she let herself enjoy it. The sound of approaching footsteps made her open her eyes again. She tensed without meaning to. She wasn't expecting anyone. When she turned her head, she saw Dylan walking toward her. Her heart tightened. He stopped a few feet away, his hands tucked awkwardly into his pockets. For once, he didn't look smug or amused. He looked unsure, almost shy. "Hey," he said softly. Mara looked down at her feet. "Hi." Dylan scratched the back of his neck. "I didn't get a chance to say it earlier, but you were amazing up there." Mara didn't answer. She wasn't sure what to say. Compliments from him didn't feel right. Not after the way he mocked her. Dylan shifted nervously. "Look, I know I joked around earlier. I didn't mean anything by it. You laughed at me," Mara said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. He winced. "Yeah, I know. And I'm sorry. I really am. I shouldn't have said what I did. I didn't think." He trailed off, glancing toward the floor. "You didn't think I could play," Mara finished for him. Dylan let out a slow breath. "No, I didn't. And that was wrong of me." Mara didn't respond right away. She didn't like the feeling of being the center of his attention, even if he was apologizing. But she appreciated honesty, and she could tell he was trying. "It's fine," she whispered. "I'm used to people not expecting much." Dylan's eyes softened. "Well, they're wrong." There was a long pause between them, quiet, slightly uncomfortable, but not tense. "You know," Dylan said, taking a small step closer, "I've been playing guitar since I was a kid. I thought I was pretty good. But when you started playing," he let out a small, breathy laugh. "I think I stopped breathing for a second." Mara blinked, surprised. "I'm serious," he continued. "You didn't just play a song. You made the room feel something." Her face warmed. She didn't know what to do with such words. "Thank you," she whispered. Dylan nodded. "You deserve it." A few seconds passed before he spoke again. "I hope you didn't let my stupid comment get to you," he said. "You're way better than I expected. Way better than anyone expected." Mara looked at him, and really looked. His eyes held no hint of sarcasm. No teasing. Just honesty. "I almost didn't go on stage," she said quietly. "I was really nervous." Dylan's expression softened even more. "I get nervous too. I just hide it better." She raised an eyebrow slightly. "Do you?" "Yeah," he admitted, shrugging slightly. "I talk loud, joke around, act confident. But inside?" He shook his head. "It's not always like that." Mara didn't expect that answer. She always assumed people like him never felt fear, never felt doubt. "Everyone gets scared," he added. "Even people who look like they're not." Mara nodded slowly, letting the truth of that settle. Before either of them could say more, the coordinator's voice echoed down the hallway. Break's almost over. Back inside, everyone. Dylan stepped back, giving her a small nod. See you in there. Mara returned the nod, then watched him walk back toward the auditorium. She stayed in the hallway for a few more seconds before following. When she stepped inside, the atmosphere felt different again. People still whispered, still looked at her with surprise and admiration. But now, she felt the beginnings of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Belonging. The next few performers went through their acts, each bringing their own style and energy to the stage. Mara tried to focus on watching them, but her mind kept drifting to the piano, to the moment she played, and to Dylan's unexpected apology. Every now and then, she caught him glancing in her direction. Not staring, just small, curious looks, like he was seeing her for the first time. And it wasn't just Dylan. Other students approached her too. A boy from the choir group smiled warmly at her. That was beautiful, he said. A girl from the acting team added, You made the room go silent. That never happens. Even two dancers who are known for being chatty nodded at her with genuine respect. Mara didn't know what to do with all the attention. She felt grateful, overwhelmed, shy, and proud all at once. She tried her best to smile and thank them, though her voice often came out too soft or too nervous. But no one seemed bothered. In fact, her quiet nature made them even more impressed. They didn't expect such powerful music from someone so gentle, so soft-spoken. Once all the performers finished the second round, the coordinator gathered everyone near the stage again. You all did great today, he announced. Tomorrow will be the final rehearsal before the main event. Make sure you rest and come prepared. Excitement rippled through the room. People chatted about their routines, their outfits, their nerves, and their expectations. Mara stood at the edge of the group, listening quietly. She knew tomorrow mattered. The final rehearsal would be the last chance to prove herself before the talent show. She wasn't aiming to win anything. She just wanted to play without fear, to show herself she could do it. As everyone started leaving the auditorium, Dylan passed by her once more. Hey, he said, gently tapping his guitar case. If you ever want to practice together, or just talk about music, I'd like that. Mara hesitated. She didn't know how to respond, but his expression looked sincere, patient. Finally, she nodded. Maybe. He smiled softly this time, not in his usual confident way. Cool. See you tomorrow. Mara watched him walk away again. She gathered her bag and placed her hand on the piano one last time. Tracing the edge gently. She felt different. Now, not completely confident, not suddenly brave, but no longer the girl who walked into the auditorium that morning, feeling invisible. She had stepped into the light without meaning to. And now, she couldn't step back into the shadows, even if she tried. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new emotions, perhaps even new surprises. But for the first time in a long time, she felt ready. Not fearless, but ready. And that was enough. The next morning arrived with a quiet calm that felt almost unreal to Mara. She woke earlier than usual, her mind already replaying the events of the previous day. The applause, the whispers, the looks of surprise. She had never been the center of anything before. She wasn't sure how to feel about it. Part of her wanted to hide under her blankets until the world forgot about her again. But another part, a small brave part, wanted to see where this new attention might lead. She sat up slowly, letting the soft light from the window warm her face. For a moment, she simply breathed, trying to settle her nerves. Today was the final rehearsal. Tomorrow, the real show. Everything felt heavier now. Not bad, just big. After getting ready, she packed her bag with more care than usual. She slipped her sheet music inside, though she knew she wouldn't need it. Her fingers remembered every note better than her eyes did. Still, Having the papers made her feel safe, like she wasn't stepping into the unknown alone. Her walk to school was quiet. She watched the world around her wake up. People walking dogs. Kids carrying backpacks bigger than themselves. Store owners lifting metal gates and sweeping sidewalks. It grounded her somehow. It reminded her that life outside the auditorium still existed. When she finally reached the building, she stood at the entrance for a full minute before walking in. Her palms were already sweaty. Her heart beat steadily, but faster than usual. As she entered the auditorium hallway, she heard voices ahead, laughter, conversations, the sound of someone tuning an instrument. Everything felt familiar and new at the same time. The moment she stepped inside, a few heads turned. "There she is," someone whispered. Mara lowered her eyes, pretending not to notice, but her stomach fluttered in a way she couldn't control. She walked toward her usual seat near the piano, keeping her steps soft. When she looked up, she saw Dylan sitting on the stage edge with his guitar in his lap. The morning light from the high windows cast soft shadows across the room, and he looked almost peaceful in it. But the moment he saw her, his face brightened. "Hey," he said, lifting one hand in a small wave. She offered a shy nod. "Hi." He hopped down from the stage and walked toward her. His steps were slower than usual, not rushed, not overly confident. "Just steady. You came early," he said. "Couldn't sleep much," she admitted. He laughed softly. "Same. My mind wouldn't shut up." She looked at him with gentle curiosity. "About the show?" "Yeah," he said, then paused. "And about yesterday?" Mara looked away for a moment, unsure what to say. Before she could decide, the coordinator walked in with a clipboard, calling everyone to gather around the stage. "All right, everyone. Today is important. The final rehearsal decides the order of performances for tomorrow's show. So I need full attention, full effort, and full focus." The room filled quickly. People shuffled into loose groups. Some chatted nervously. Others bounced on their feet to release energy. Mara stayed near the piano. Dylan stood not far from her, but he didn't push conversation. He just stayed close enough to show he was around if she needed someone. The coordinator began assigning warm-up routines, dividing students into sections. Dancers reviewed steps. Singers ran vocal exercises. Actors repeated lines under their breath. When it was time for instrument performers, Mara sat at the piano bench, breathing slowly. Her fingers hovered over the keys, trembling slightly. She didn't want yesterday to be a one-time miracle. She didn't want to disappoint anyone today. Most of all, she didn't want to disappoint herself. The coordinator walked up beside her. "Ready?" She exhaled. "I think so." "You'll do great," he said with a reassuring nod. She didn't know if she believed him, but she appreciated the kindness. Dylan took his place a few feet away to warm up on his guitar. Mara could see him glance at her once in a while, giving her small, encouraging looks, not loud, not distracting. Just enough to say, "You've got this." Taking another breath, she placed her hands on the keys and began to play. This time, the music flowed more smoothly than the day before. She didn't search for the notes, they found her. Every key pressed felt like a whisper of emotion she didn't know how else to express. Her nerves were still there, but they softened each second she played. People began to quiet down again, drawn in by the sound. It wasn't a planned performance, but it felt like one. Even the dancers paused mid-stretch, listening. The singers stopped their warm-ups. The actors lowered their scripts. Mara didn't notice any of it. She was inside the music, lost in it. When she finally ended the melody, there was a long moment of silence. Then the whispers started again. "Wow, she's really good. How does she do that?" Mara looked down quickly, her ears burning. The coordinator smiled. "Excellent control. Excellent emotion." Keep it up for the final rehearsal. Dylan strummed a quiet chord on his guitar, waiting until she looked his way. That was beautiful, he said softly. She gave him a tiny, grateful smile. The coordinator then clapped his hands loudly. All right, everyone. Time to run the full show. Performers, get in line. We're choosing the running order today. A ripple of excitement traveled through the room. Everyone suddenly felt taller, brighter, more alert. Mara joined the line near the end. She liked performing later rather than earlier. It gave her time to observe, to breathe. Dylan ended up standing not far from her. Do you know what you're playing for the real show? He asked quietly. I think so, she said. Something simple. Simple is good, he replied. Simple can still hit hard. They waited in line as the show rehearsal began. The first performer, a singer with a soft voice, stepped onto the stage. The lights turned on, casting a glow on her face. She started singing a slow, emotional song that made the room feel almost fragile. People watched in silence. One by one, the performers took their turns. An actor delivered a heartfelt monologue. A dance trio performed a routine with sharp, clean moves. A violinist played a lively piece. A comedy duo made everyone laugh with perfectly timed jokes that cut the tension in the room. Mara admired each act, soaking in the energy, the bravery, the passion. This was more than a school event. It felt like something bigger, something that connected people. Finally, it was Dylan's turn. He walked onto the stage with his guitar slung around him. For once, he didn't look cocky. He looked nervous. And somehow, that made him seem more real. He adjusted the microphone, glanced at the audience briefly, then looked down at his guitar. When he started playing, the sound was rich and warm. But when he began to sing, the room grew even quieter. His voice wasn't flashy. It wasn't loud. But it had a softness that carried emotion, something honest. Every word felt like something he meant. Mara watched him closely, surprised by how different he sounded from the confident boy she had first met. His music made him human in a way she didn't expect. When he finished, the applause came fast. He stepped off the stage, cheeks slightly pink, and walked back to his place in line. As he passed Mara, he looked at her with a shy little smile. That wasn't too bad, right? He whispered. She shook her head gently. It was really good. His smile widened. Finally, Mara's turn came. Her heart pounded. Her legs felt strange, like they didn't belong to her. But she walked onto the stage anyway, taking slow steps. The lights warmed her face. The room stretched far, and quiet in front of her. She sat at the bench. Her fingers hovered over the keys. The coordinator nodded from the side. She began, but this time, something felt different. She wasn't just playing notes. She was telling a story she never said out loud. The melody rose and fell gently, breathing like a living thing. Her fear softened with every chord. Her heart stopped racing and matched the rhythm of the music. For the second time in 2 days, the room fell completely silent. When she finished, she kept her head down, unsure what expression she might see if she looked up. But then, applause. Soft at first, then stronger. Then full. Mara lifted her gaze slowly. She saw people smiling. She saw people nodding, whispering, and she saw Dylan clapping louder than anyone. The coordinator smiled proudly. You've found your piece for tomorrow, he said. Mara stepped off the stage, her heartbeat unsteady, but warm. Dylan walked up to her as she returned to the group. That was incredible, he said quietly. Like unreal. Mara lowered her eyes, shy. Thank you. He scratched his cheek awkwardly. I meant what I said yesterday. If you ever want to work on music together, or even just talk before the show so you don't feel alone, I'm here. For the first time, Mara didn't hesitate. I'd like that, she said. His expression softened into genuine relief. The rehearsal continued for another hour, but Mara's mind was floating elsewhere the whole time. She felt safe. She felt understood. She felt seen. When the coordinator finally dismissed everyone, the room buzzed with excitement for tomorrow. Mara packed her bag slowly, her hands still trembling slightly from the performance. Dylan walked over one last time before leaving. "Good luck tomorrow," he said. "You too," she replied. He hesitated for a second, then gave her a warm nod before walking out. Mara remained in the auditorium a moment longer, placing her fingertips gently on the piano. She wasn't scared of tomorrow anymore. For the first time in her life, she was ready to be heard, and she wasn't alone. The morning of the talent show came with a kind of stillness that settled deep inside Mara. She woke before her alarm, sitting up slowly as the early sunlight touched the corner of her room. The air felt different today, not heavy like it usually did before something big. Instead, it felt calm, as if the world itself wanted her to feel steady. She sat at the edge of her bed, letting her feet rest on the cool floor. Her heart was beating softly, not too fast, not too slow, just steady. For the first time, she didn't feel like she had to fight her own nerves. She wasn't fearless, but she wasn't scared either. She was somewhere in between, and that felt strangely perfect. After getting ready, she looked at herself in the mirror longer than usual. She didn't do anything special, no new hairstyle, no fancy clothes, just her normal self. But something small had changed in her eyes. She saw someone who had stepped onto a stage and made people listen. She saw someone who had surprised not only a room full of students, but herself. She took a slow breath. "Just be you," she whispered to her reflection. With her bag over her shoulder, she headed out. The walk to school felt different from every other morning. There were more cars on the road, more people out early, more energy in the air. It wasn't just any school day. It was show day. When Mara reached the entrance, she saw a small crowd already outside, students chatting, parents dropping off equipment, teachers organizing things. People seemed brighter, louder, excited. She stepped inside quietly and made her way to the auditorium. The hallway buzzed with movement. Costumes hung from hooks. Makeup kits lay open on tables. Performers were practicing last-minute stretches, lines, and warm dash-ups. When Mara walked in, a few people turned their heads. "There she is," one of the dancers whispered. "Hope she plays that same piece," another said. "But imagine if she plays something even better," someone replied. Mara tried not to react, but inside her heart warmed. They weren't whispering with doubt like before. They were whispering with excitement. She walked toward the piano just to see it, to remind herself it was real. The surface felt cool beneath her fingertips. She traced the edge gently, letting her nerves settle. Then she heard footsteps. Turning slightly, she saw Dylan walking toward her. He looked more put together today, hair styled a little nicer, shirt cleaner, guitar case decorated with a new sticker she hadn't seen before. But his eyes had the same softness they carried yesterday. "Morning," he said with a warm smile. "Morning," she replied softly. "Nervous?" he asked. "A little," she admitted. "Same," he said with a small laugh. "I barely slept." They stood side by side for a moment, watching everyone rushing around. "You ready for today?" he asked. Mara nodded slowly. "I think so." "You'll be great," he said, and there was not a single hint of doubt in his voice. Before she could respond, the coordinator clapped loudly from the front of the room. "Everyone, please gather on stage for attendance and final instructions." People hurried to form a loose group on the stage. Some were bouncing on their toes with excitement, some stretching their hands nervously, some whispering last-minute pep talks to themselves. Mara and Dylan joined them. Once everyone quieted, the coordinator spoke. This is it, the big day. Remember, mistakes happen. That's okay. What matters is that you perform with heart. Believe in what you're doing. Trust your practice. And most importantly, enjoy the moment. The room hummed with soft energy. Your families and friends will start arriving soon, the coordinator continued. We'll have 1 hour before the audience enters. Use this time to warm up or relax. Don't exhaust yourselves. Students nodded. And final reminder after each performance, stay in the backstage area until the show ends. Once the final act is done, we'll all come out together to bow. Another ripple of nods. All right, go prepare. The room burst into movement again. Mara returned to the piano, but this time she didn't sit. She simply hovered nearby, letting herself feel close to it without wearing herself out. Dylan took out his guitar and sat on a chair nearby, plucking strings softly. You want to warm up? He asked. Maybe just a little, Mara said. She sat at the bench and pressed a few soft notes. Nothing heavy, just enough to wake her fingers. You sound calm, Dylan said. I think I'm more excited than scared now, she said. He grinned. That's the best way to be. They continued, warming up quietly until the coordinator announced that the audience would start. Entering soon, the performers were guided backstage where they waited in a line based on the program order. Mara was somewhere in the middle. Dylan was a few spots before her. The backstage area was filled with soft whispers, nervous breaths, and the rustling of costumes. Mara watched the other performers go on stage, one by one, as the show began. Singer opened the show with a strong voice that filled the room with emotion. The audience cheered loudly. Then came the comedy duo, making everyone laugh and easing the tension in the room. A dance group followed, moving with precision and energy that made the stage feel alive. Mara felt her nerves rising, but not in a suffocating way. Just enough to remind her that she cared. Soon, it was Dylan's turn. He closed his guitar case slowly, took a deep breath, and looked at Mara. I'll see you afterward, he whispered. She gave him a tiny nod. Good luck. He stepped onto the stage. She listened from behind the curtain as he began to play. His guitar sounded even fuller, richer than yesterday. And when he started to sing, the audience quieted immediately. Mara watched through a small gap in the curtain. She saw people leaning forward, paying close attention. His voice carried warmth, honesty, and emotion. He wasn't performing to impress anyone. He was simply sharing something real. By the time he finished, the applause was loud and heartfelt. He walked off stage a little breathless, cheeks warm and eyes bright. That was amazing, Mara whispered. He smiled shyly. Thanks. Then his expression softened. You're up after 2 more acts. Mara nodded, her breath catching slightly. The next 2 performers went on: a violinist with fast fingers and a pair of actors with a funny scene. Then, suddenly, it was her turn. The coordinator gave her a gentle pat on the shoulder. You've got this. Her heart thudded in her chest. Her palms were warm, but her steps were steady. She walked onto the stage. The lights shone bright and soft across the room. She couldn't see faces clearly, only shapes in the dim audience. She sat at the piano bench and took one slow breath. Fingers hovered over the keys. Then she began. The first note rang, out clear and soft. Then another and another. Her melody flowed, like a quiet river, gentle and steady, carrying emotion in every shift. She didn't rush. She didn't hold back. She just played honestly, fully, bravely. The room grew silent, the kind of silence that only comes when people truly listen. Her hands moved with fluidity she didn't know she possessed. Her heart calmed with each note. She wasn't thinking about mistakes or pressure. She wasn't thinking about who was watching. She was thinking only about the music, about the weight it lifted, about the story it carried, when she reached the final note. She let it linger in the air for a moment before lifting her hands from the keys. For a second, there was nothing, then dash applause, rising, growing, filling the room. Mara looked up slowly, her breath catching. People were clapping with warmth, with admiration, with respect. Some even stood. She felt a wave of emotion swell inside her. She stood from the bench and gave a small bow, her hands trembling slightly, as she walked off the stage. Dylan was waiting for her just behind the curtain. The moment she stepped down, he whispered, "That was beautiful. Really beautiful." Mara felt her throat tighten with emotion. "Thank you." "Everyone felt it," he said softly. "You didn't just play. You connected." She didn't know what to say, so she simply smiled. The rest of the show continued, but Mara felt like she was floating. Not because of praise, not because of attention, but because she had done something she once thought she couldn't. When the final act finished, all the performers gathered on stage for the group bow. The audience applauded again, and Mara's heart felt fuller than she ever imagined possible. Afterward, people walked up to her with kind words. "That was amazing. You play with so much feeling. You're really talented." Mara thanked them softly. Her cheeks warmed as the crowd slowly started leaving. Dylan walked up to her one last time. "You know," he said, rubbing the back of his neck, "I think